Isn't God amazing? Just as we were praying there and spending that time in worship, this is something that God has seemed to be laying on our hearts over the last number of weeks in our worship, just this desire for freedom. And we're going to touch a bit on that this morning as well, so I'm excited. And I'm going to do something slightly different this morning. We're going to be having a look at Matthew chapter 16 as we continue with our series that we've been looking at. And I just want to use this app to give you an idea of where they were. This is a story. Jesus was hanging out with his disciples at a place called Caesarea Philippi. I actually think it's probably the only time they were there, furthest north that they'd ever traveled. And I just want to take you on a little bit of an idea of the area that they reckon that they were in that area, Caesarea Philippi. So this will give you an idea of what they would have seen as they were in that kind of area. And as you can see, there's a couple of shrines there. If you look directly ahead, you'll see the shrine to Pan and Nemesis. I don't know if it came up there. And so that's what's directly ahead. Now, if I take you just to the left there, you can see the remains of the temple of Zeus, just sitting over there. So this is where they were. Jesus was hanging out with his disciples, and he was talking to them. And you can see this is what it looks like today. Obviously, there was a temple there at the time. But that will give you an idea, if you went to that spot today, what it would look like. And just to give you an idea of the view, there we go. That's what it looks like. Actually quite green and quite beautiful. And then maybe just zoom in there on that shrine to Pan and Nemesis, just to give you a clearer picture there as well. Just look around. There's a natural spring in that cave there that comes out of that cave. So that's where they were. I thought it would be nice. So sometimes we read the Bible, we don't really have a picture of what it looks like. It would have looked different then. Obviously, it's years and years later. But that will just give you an idea of what was happening. And so we're going to continue on with our series on making disciples this morning. And I want to speak this morning about knowing Jesus intimately. Now, for those of you who were here last week, we spoke about the danger of hypocrisy. And it's a disease that has plagued the church since before its inception. It's just crept in, and it continues to creep into this day. And I have to say, for those of you who were here last week, maybe you even noticed it was a tough message to share. You know, it's really, really hard when you have to share a heavy message like that. So it was really tough for me, and I wrestled with it through the week. But I have to say, you know, sometimes, like any parent, God has to say tough things to us at times. And it's because he loves us, and because he wants the best thing for us. And one of the main points that came out last week was that we mustn't allow people who are entangled in hypocrisy, because unfortunately that happens. We mustn't allow them to influence us as it happens. And so maybe a good way of illustrating this was if you're a parent and your kid is in a class and there's a kid that's really having a bad influence on your child, you know, you're not going to go and say, right, I'm taking this kid out of school and I'm taking this kid out of the class and everything. But what you're hopefully going to do is try and teach them how to maybe love that child and how to be a good influence on that child. But one of the things you're also going to teach them is don't allow that child to influence you. That's one of the values that you want your children to get. And so it is for us with God. He says, I don't want you to allow this thing of hypocrisy to influence you. And last week we looked at it from the perspective of people who may be entangled. It. Don't let them influence you. But this week I want us to also be aware of the fact that in reality we are all hypocrites in one way or another. We all do it. That's the reality. So we've also got to protect ourselves, if you want to say, against ourselves. As a young adult group, our Bible study, our small group is going to be doing this book called The Christian Atheist over the next 12 weeks. And this speaks about it a lot, Greg Groeschel. So I recommend that book. And he just gives his own testimony about how he's lived in hypocrisy as a Christian, as a pastor. Really, really great book to read. But the reality is that we all do it. We all battle with this. It affects us all in subtle ways. And often we don't even realize that we're putting on a show. So I'd have to say to you this morning that I, Brett, battle with hypocrisy. I do. I want to be open. I want to be real with you this morning. I battle with it. And I might not live the life of a Pharisee. I probably could honestly say I'm not entangled in it, and that's good. But in one way or another, I've lived a lie in my Christianity. And just to give you an example, a few examples, we say things like we believe in the power of prayer, right? And then the whole week we go and we don't pray. And we've got a lot of things that we need the power of prayer, but we don't pray. Right? We say things like, we believe God is big, but we worry. I did that this week, confession time, a lot. All right? We say that we are worshiping God with our lives, but we put other things first. That's having other gods before me. We say when we come to church, yes, God is the most important thing in my life, but our time doesn't reflect that during the week. So in little ways, we all kind of do this. And we've got to protect ourselves from it as much as we can. And I know that this is something maybe really negative right now, but I want to say to you, if you are getting it wrong this morning or this week, if you got it wrong, join the club. Okay? Maybe you can breathe a sigh of relief now. Join the club. I want to speak to people who got it wrong this week. All right? I don't want to. If you got it right this week, you can go to sleep now. But I would like to say to you that the Bible even says you're lying, and you're probably in greater danger of being a Pharisee than anyone if that's you. So I'd like to speak to everyone who's getting it wrong. All right? And this week I've got it wrong a lot. Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong, and I did not react very well this week. So I just praise God that it is about living in His grace. Amen. It's not about living in the law. That's what Paul said to us, but it's about living in His grace. You see, Jesus wants us to get to know Him deeply. That is the most important thing. We see it so graphically in the story of Mary and Martha. Martha running around and Mary just sitting at His feet. Jesus, what He wants from us is to get to know Him deeply, to know Him intimately. And the only reason we can do that in the first place is because of grace. If it weren't for grace, the curtain would not have been torn in two. We would not be able to enter into the presence of God. The only reason we can know the King of Kings intimately is because of grace. He died for this. So it's got to be important to Him, right? That we get to know Him intimately. This is how it was in the Garden of Eden. There was this intimate relationship between God and us. So it's far more important to Him that we get to know Him than it is than us trying to get it right all the time, or trying not to sin, or avoiding sin, or to try and force ourselves to have the fruit of the Spirit. Man, I must have the fruit of the Spirit. It's far more important to God that we get to know Him intimately, because all of those things, living the life that He wants us to live, will come naturally out of that. It will flow naturally out of our relationship with Him. I want to say to the husbands and the wives this morning, husbands and wives, how many of you could say that on the day you got married, that you knew your partner, you knew everything about them, you knew them perfectly? How many can put up your hand and say that? No, I'm not putting up my hand. All right. So, all right, no, you don't. All right, because 1 year in, 2 years in, and 30 years in, you are still learning things, and you are still surprised by things. There are things that come. Man, I didn't realize this about you. I didn't realize that you thought this way about these things, because you had an experience, and so you are learning new things. Now, if you think of all the effort and all the energy and all the love that we put into our marriages, and still 30 years down the line, we still don't know each other completely. Do you think the time that we spend with God trying to get to know Him is enough? Do you think our intimacy with God is enough? Because if we're not putting in the time, if we're not spending time getting to know Him, then we cannot say we know Him intimately. And being a disciple, that's what it's about. Knowing God. You know, leading up to Passion, I got really excited, and I was following Louis Giglio and Chris Tomlin and all the guys on Twitter, and I was checking out all their tweets, what they were saying. Yeah, it's great to be in South Africa. And I'd say, hey, Alex, it's really cool. You know, Louis was saying this. And then, Chris said this, you know. And Alex is like, you don't know them. You know, you can't call them Louis and Chris. You don't know them. And it's true. You know, if you really know someone, you have pet names for them. And you start to talk about them in a specific way. Because the reality is, I don't know Louis Giglio and Chris Tomlin. I know stuff about them. But I don't know them. And for many Christians, if they're honest, and today is really about being honest, they say, you know what, I know a lot of stuff about God, and I know a lot of stuff about church, and I know a lot of stuff about being a Christian, but if I'm honest, I'd have to say that I don't really know Him. Now let's look at this maybe from a different perspective. We're talking about making disciples, and our calling as disciples is to make disciples, right? How can you go and tell other people about someone you don't know? Look at it from that perspective. If you're selling a product and you don't know anything about the product, you can't sell it, right? And it's the same with us. We can't share who Christ is with people, who Jesus is with people, if we simply don't know who He is. So it's important that we get to know Him. And this story, where Jesus found His disciples, and you can picture it now, you can see it, you can see where they were. was a time when the disciples got to know Christ in a whole new way. And this is the kind of thing that should be happening in our lives all the time. These moments where we're like, oh, wow, like I knew that about God, but wow, you know what I'm saying? Really getting to know him a whole lot better. Matthew chapter 16 and verse 13 to 20, we'll read together. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do the people say that the Son of Man is?" Well, they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets." And then he asked them, "But who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "You are blessed, Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You did not learn this from any human being. Now I say to you that you are Peter, which means rock, and upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you forbid on earth will be forbidden in heaven, and whatever you permit on earth will be permitted in heaven." And then he sternly warned his disciples, not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. The disciples had spent quite a bit of time with Jesus at this point. But once again, they had an opportunity to get to know him better. And we too need to grow constantly in our understanding of who he is. And I wonder if Jesus were to ask you the question today, "But who do you say I am?" What would your answer be? Would it be the kind of textbook answer, "Well, you know, the Son of God, and you did this, and you did these things, and I know about this that you did in that time, and I know about this"? Or would you say, "Yeah, I know you, Jesus. Oh, man, we had such a good time yesterday. It was so cool what you said to me the other day. Man, I just enjoyed that, and it made me laugh, and oh, man, I just really appreciate the way you wrapped your arms around me when I was going through that struggle. Man, yeah, what would your response be?" I wonder what our answer would look like, because it would probably reveal the degree at which we know them. And I would probably say there are different levels of knowing Jesus. All right? And that would be true to say. There are those who don't know him at all. And we know that there are many people in the world who just don't know who Jesus is. All right? And then there are those who know him intimately. Not just know about him, but they know him intimately. And then there's everyone in between. And this morning as we're speaking, I'm not going to ask you at any point to say, "All right, on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you fit into it?" That's between you and God. I'm not going to ask you that at all. But maybe as we're talking, you'll be able to gauge, where am I on this whole thing? And even if we feel we're pretty close to God, we've still got a long way to go. So this is for all of us. But maybe we can just see, where am I? And am I going deeper in my relationship with Christ? So I want to start off by looking at the one extreme, and then we're going to go to the other extreme. We'll start off with the extreme of those who don't know Jesus. And there are many who don't know. Many people in the world who have no idea who he is still today. There are many unreached people. In other words, entire groups of people, entire cultures who've not heard of him. There are also many countries like our own that maybe have a Christian heritage, but those Christian values are getting pushed out. If you look at the schools and what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say. We experience it in our country. We can't just assume that kids know about Jesus because they went to school. And we find that a lot. At youth, we see the difference between the kids who are growing up in Christian homes and those who aren't. Because those who aren't getting it anywhere. And they simply don't know who Jesus is. They don't know the stories. They don't know the Bible. When Jesus was on earth, most people in the entire world didn't know who he was. All right? Because it was just going. It was just getting started. The church was the foundations were just being laid. And only the Jews had heard about the coming Messiah. So very few people knew who he was. The rest of the world was in darkness, worshipping false gods. So I believe that it's really significant that Christ chose this location to speak about who he was and to say, "This is who I am." And I want to just go back to those pictures again. I'm just going to show you a picture looking from the top. You can see it there. You can see the cave. You can just see the little shrines to Pan and Nemesis, the Greek gods. And then you can make out the temple there. Now, what I'm going to do is they've kind of have an idea of what it might have looked like. So I'm going to superimpose that over it, just so that you can see, we don't know for sure, but give you an idea of what it would have looked like when Jesus was there. And you can even see him there, just by the water. Looks like him, eh? Okay. So there he is, and let me tell you a little bit about those things. So that big thing there by the cave and those shrines there, that's Pan, all right? Pan was the Greek half man, half goat god of fright. Yeah, if you look like that, you'd give people a fright, all right? So that makes sense. He's a half man, half goat god of fright. And the spring that flowed there was considered supernatural. It was attributed to this particular god. And then there's Nemesis. Sound familiar? The goddess of vengeance. So when we use the word my nemesis, maybe we shouldn't use that word because we're speaking about an actual goddess there. The goddess of vengeance, and then Zeus, the god of thunder, also known by the Greeks as the king of the gods. What even worse, you know what I'm saying? And this is where Jesus decided to hang out with his disciples and to reveal to them who he is. And I think that's pretty cool because he was saying then, and he's still saying today, I am the one true God. He was making a statement. Let me stand here in the midst of all of these false gods and make this clear. There is no other God but me. And he's still saying it to us today. And it is still the message that we need to get out today in a world where so many people are saying, you know, if you live a good life, or maybe it doesn't matter what you believe in, or if you follow this way or follow this way, you can be okay and you can get to heaven. And Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. And he makes this statement in this place, in the midst of the enemy, to say, there is no other God but me. And that is the message we need to pass on to this world, of the one true God. But how do we tell the world that there is one God if we don't know him? If we don't really know him? How can they see this relationship that we have with him if it just isn't there? If we aren't living in it? Then there's another group of people. There are people who believe in God, but they say, you know what, he was, as far as Jesus is concerned, he was just a good man. They don't doubt that he existed. In fact, we cannot doubt that he existed historically any more than we could doubt that Julius Caesar and many other historical characters existed. It's there, the record of it. But there are many people who say he was just a good man. And Jesus dealt with this issue when he asked the disciples the question. He says to them, who do the people say I am? And they said things like, well, some say John the Baptist and others say Elijah, Jeremiah, one of the prophets, all good men, all prophets, all men of God. But still not who he really was. Still not who he really is. And from that day till now, the disciples of Christ have had to show the world that, listen, this person that we know existed, that we know is there, that many of you admire and respect, and maybe you'd tip your hat to him if you passed him by, but you need to understand that he is more than just a good man. He's a son of God. And to this day, we still are responsible to share that message. But again, how can we share that he is more than this if he's not more than this for us? How can we say to them, hey, you know what? Jesus is alive and you can have a relationship with him. If they don't see it, if we can't say, hey, God spoke to me this week, this is what he said. If we can't say, hey, this is what God is doing in my life. If we can't say that right now, if we could only say it 10 years ago, then there's a problem. We're going to battle to convince people of the truth. But let me tell you, that's not the only reason we should get to know Jesus better. It's a very important thing, but it's not the only reason to get to know him better. Because let me tell you something, getting to know Jesus is what we do. It's one of the most crucial things about being a disciple. It's how we roll. That's how we live our lives. In biblical times, a rabbi would have disciples who would follow him and walk and do everything that the rabbi would do just so that they could get to know exactly what he did and that they would be able to replicate that. They would be able to do it. But as disciples of Christ, we don't only want to understand what he does, we want to know who he is. That's what we want. That's what we need to desire. And my prayer that even as we are speaking and even as we are looking at this passage, that there would be a burning desire in your heart to say, it's not enough. What I have is not enough. I want more. So let's go look at the other extreme. This is the positive part. This is the part where we can say, yes, this is what I want. Let's have a look at how the disciples got to know him better. The first thing is they followed. And I've chosen 3 pictures now for the next few points of just kids and their parents. And once again, it seems, since Michaela shared that message on being a child, God is repeating this. And when God repeats it, we really need to listen, that we need to have this mentality of a child. And children, the way they learn is they copy. All right? And there's this little girl learning how to brush her teeth, and she's copying her mom. And that's how kids do it. That's how they learn. They copy their parents. And it's a really great way of doing things and imitating. And that's what we need to be doing with Jesus. We just need to be following him. Just say, wow, this stuff that you're doing, not just thousands of years ago, but now. I see you doing it in this person's life. I see you doing it in this person's life. I see you doing it in this area or this community, in our church. And I want to get involved. I want to follow you. It's a great way to get to know someone. It's a great way to learn, is to imitate. I've tried to learn a couple of languages growing up over time, but I didn't grow up as a child learning 2 languages. A lot of children grow up learning 2 or 3 languages, and because they imitate their parents, the best way to learn, they learn these 3 languages from young. I've tried to learn it academically, and it just doesn't work the same way. So the best way you can do it is actually to be immersed in that place where, like, if you want to learn French, you go to France and you just only speak French, and you're around people and you copy and you imitate. Great way to learn something. And the disciples were always with Jesus. In this series, we've only focused on the passages where the disciples are actually mentioned, but they were always with him. They were always there. They were following him every step of the way. And on this particular occasion, they followed him all the way to Caesarea Philippi, furthest north that they'd ever been. Probably never went there, again with him. And into the midst of the enemy, into the place where no good Jew would probably want to go. But they went with him because they followed. And this is the same story after story after story where the disciples followed Jesus despite the fact that it didn't always make sense. They just followed him. And they got to know him. And we will know him by following him. We will know him by just saying, Jesus, whatever you're doing, I just want to be there. I just want to be there. I just want to be there. I want to be Mary now. I want to be Mary tomorrow. And yes, there are things you're going to call me to do. But even in that, I'm just following you. I'm following you. I'm following you. So they followed. Second thing we see is that they listened. Another excellent way of learning about a person is to listen to them. Any relationship where this falls out the window, there's trouble. Right? When communication breaks down in a relationship, when even one person in a relationship stops listening, there's going to be problems. There's going to be friction. You're not going to be able to get to know each other. And so often we listen, but we don't listen with our hearts. And there's different levels of listening where we say, that whole seek first to understand, where we say, I really want to understand what's going on. And we need to do that with our relationship with God. So often we say, man, I just need to spend some time with God. We read a quick verse and, okay, I'm done for the day and we're good. And we haven't let it sink in. We haven't listened to him. And when that happens, it's a problem. And it's a bit of a lost art, listening, in this day and age, isn't it? There's so much noise and distraction and cell phones and all this stuff going on around us. It's really, it becomes more of a challenge to find that place where we can just be still with God. And on this occasion, Peter was able to gain a deeper understanding of Christ because he listened carefully to God. That's awesome. That he was able to hear something that we all know, we take for granted today, that Jesus is the Son of God, that he's the Messiah. Even someone who doesn't go to church, or maybe doesn't even believe, who's never chosen to follow Christ, has probably heard about the fact that Jesus is the Son of God and that he's the Messiah. This was never heard of at this point. The fact that Peter knew this was because God revealed it to him. And Jesus says to him, you are blessed because God has revealed it to you. You haven't learned this from somebody. You haven't read it in a book. You didn't get good advice and that's how you were able to know this. The only reason you know it is because God said it to you, and that needs to be our lives as disciples. That the only reason we know this, the only reason we understand what Jesus is doing right now is because we have listened to him. We need to learn to listen. I say often to our musicians that if you want to be part of a music team, one of the things you've got to learn is to listen to each other. It's a skill you've got to learn. Because you can be the best player or whatever on the keyboard or guitarist that there is, but if you can't listen to the team, you're just going to cause disunity and chaos. That's what happens when we don't listen, just chaos. If we want something beautiful in our relationship with God, we have to learn to listen. So may we get to know him deeper, because we say, you know what, wherever you go, I want to follow. And whatever you say, Lord, I want to be there listening in that moment. I don't want to miss it. I don't want to miss a thing. And then lastly this morning, I want us to see that they received. This is something that maybe is a little bit different this morning. It's very important. Peter followed Jesus, he listened to him, and he received something from him. And I like this picture because it's something that all kids do. I should have probably got one of the little boy is in his mom's shoes, because that's even funnier. But all kids seem to do this. I don't remember doing it myself, but they want to dress in their parents' clothes. All right? And so they receive something from their parents that isn't theirs, but they get to enjoy it, right? And that's how it should be for us as disciples of Christ, that we need to learn how to receive from God. We need to be in that place. And I want us to see that as the disciples grew in their relationship with Christ, they followed him, they listened, they received. They got to wear the Father's clothes. They got to walk around with his stuff, with his blessings. All right? And as Christians, I think sometimes we're actually quite bad at receiving from God. Part of it is because we're so distracted, because we don't know what he's doing, because we're not following him, because we're not listening. But I think maybe some of the time we just feel, I don't deserve this. You know? But we need to be like a child again and say, oh, Dad, I want to dress in your clothes. I want to drive the car. Let me drive the car. I want to do this. I want to do everything that you're doing. Let me experience what you are involved in. Let me receive. Child's not afraid to ask for that. We need to receive the blessings of God because we grow in our relationship with him. And I tell you what, on this occasion, Peter was so blessed and he received such amazing things. Jesus changed his name. That's life-changing direction stuff. He says, you're going to be called Petros, which means little rock. And you're going to be part of the big rock, the Petra, which he refers to when he says, on this rock, this Petra, this big rock, I will build my church. He says, you're going to be part of that. You're going to be ingrained into that. You're going to be part of building the church. And you know how awesome that is? That the church is going to continue the work that I have started. And they'd seen his work, eh? They'd seen the miracles and they'd seen everything. He says, you're going to be part of this. You're going to be part of this blessing. You're going to receive this task and this mission, and you're going to receive everything that I'm doing. You can drive the car, and you can wear my clothes, and you can do all of this stuff because you are my disciple. Isn't that amazing? It says to them, I give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. I don't know what greater blessing we can have. It's amazing revelation that Peter had. I want to say to you this morning, what stops you from receiving the blessings of God? If it's because you feel I'm not worthy, I want to say to you, look at the people that Jesus chose. He chose tax collectors. He chose people who had very few abilities, it would seem, very, very few skills for this kind of work. He chose people who were sinners. No, you are his child, and it's not because you are worthy that you get to wear his clothes and receive his blessings. It's because he loves you, and it's because of grace, and it's because of grace that we can have this relationship with Jesus. And if we don't get that, we're going to keep going back to the old ways, and we're going to keep going back to the law, and we're going to keep going back to hypocrisy, and we're going to keep going back to, I must be a good little Christian, and I must do all the right things in church, and we're never going to have a deep relationship with God. It doesn't matter if you're not worthy. I'm not worthy, but his grace covers us. We sing that. Grace covers us. You can wear the Father's clothes. And yes, they might be too big for you, but isn't that exciting? That we get to be part of something bigger than us. It's awesome. So I want to say to you this morning, receive what he has for you. So may we learn to follow Jesus. And I mean look for him in everything that we do. May we learn to listen to him, maybe in a deeper way than we listen to anyone. Maybe that'll help us learn to listen in our relationships, humanly speaking. May we go deeper with him. May we learn to receive the amazing blessings that come from him. And may we impact a world that doesn't know him because we know him. because we really can say that we know him. Let's pray together.